For decades, the world revolved around a single idea: that global leadership rested almost entirely in the hands of the United States and its allies. NATO, the European Union, and a network of military bases around the world created what many called the American century. But as we step deeper into the 21st century, cracks are appearing, and the balance is shifting. Nations that once followed are now collaborating with each other, exploring parallel systems, and preparing for a future where power is far more distributed than ever before. The first signs of this shift appeared quietly. Countries like China, Russia, India, Saudi Arabia, and Brazil began holding dialogues, economic meetings, and military drills, some public, many private. New trade routes appeared across deserts, mountains, and oceans. Currency agreements were signed without fanfare. Oil partnerships were restructured. And slowly, a mosaic of new alliances began to emerge, not designed to replace the old world order immediately, but to build an alternative foundation, one that would let nations move away from old dependencies and into a more multipolar future. But to understand where the world is heading, you must look at the alliances forming beneath the surface. The partnerships that are less about ideology and more about survival, technology, resources, and long-term strategy. Today's globalization is not collapsing, it's reorganizing. And the next 50 years will be shaped not by open declarations, but by the deals that happen quietly, often without public attention. One of the clearest examples lies in the relationship between China, the Middle East, and Africa. In the early 2000s, these regions barely interacted at strategic depth. But today, they are part of a vast economic and political network. China offers infrastructure, technology, and long-term investment. The Middle East offers capital, energy, and new political ambition. Africa offers resources, markets, and demographic strength. Together, they are building a triangle of cooperation that may reshape global supply chains and global governance in ways the West never anticipated. This is not an alliance in the traditional military sense. It is a shared future constructed through railways, ports, digital infrastructure, satellites, highways, and diplomatic coordination. Meanwhile, the United States and the European Union are also quietly strengthening a different set of alliances. Not just with each other, but with countries like Japan, South Korea, Australia, and Canada. Nations that understand that the next 50 years will be defined by technology, data, AI, cybersecurity, and rare earth minerals. These partnerships are built less on geography and more on values and technological interdependence. They are forming a digital shield across the world, a network aimed at ensuring that democracies remain relevant in an era where technology itself has become a battlefield. But even inside the Western camp, shifts are happening. Europe is no longer a passive player. The continent is exploring defense autonomy, new industrial policies, and independent diplomatic strategies. Countries like France, Germany, and the Nordics are building alliances that don't always align perfectly with Washington's priorities. Europe's increasing desire for strategic independence may become one of the most transformative developments of the next half-century. Yet, the most surprising alliances are emerging in places the world once overlooked. Southeast Asia, often treated as a region caught between superpowers, is now building its own web of cooperative power. Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, and the Philippines are strengthening defense partnerships with each other, forming technology agreements, and negotiating energy and maritime boundaries. They understand that depending on any one superpower is a risk. Their emerging coalition may play kingmaker in the future global order. India, too, is moving with remarkable strategic flexibility. It participates in Western dialogues like the Quad, cooperates with Russia on defense, maintains energy ties with the Middle East, and collaborates with Africa and Southeast Asia on development. India's strategy is not to belong to any one alliance, but to build relationships across all of them, maximizing its influence as a rising global power. Over the next 50 years, India's ability to balance these networks may position it as one of the world's most pivotal players. If you look carefully, a pattern begins to emerge. The world is dividing not into two camps, but into overlapping circles of cooperation. Nations no longer align with just one partner. They join multiple networks based on technology, energy, security, trade, and political necessity. This fluidity is the new reality of international relations. One of the most underrated alliances of the future lies in the Arctic, a region once frozen and irrelevant, now becoming a global flashpoint. Melting ice is opening new shipping routes and revealing vast natural resources. Countries like Russia, Norway, Canada, and even China are preparing for a future where the Arctic becomes one of the world's most strategic regions. Behind closed doors, governments are negotiating access rights, military presence, energy extraction, and scientific cooperation. Whoever controls the Arctic may control the future of shipping, data cables, and resource flows. Another emerging alliance is centered around technology itself. Nations with strong semiconductor industries, Taiwan, South Korea, the US, Japan, are collaborating to secure chip supply chains. At the same time, China is building its own semiconductor ecosystem with partners in Southeast Asia and the Middle East. This division will shape not only the global economy but also military capability, artificial intelligence development, and space exploration. But perhaps the most intriguing alliance of all is the global energy coalition that is slowly forming. Countries rich in oil, gas, solar capability, or rare earth minerals are beginning to coordinate their strategies. The Middle East is transitioning from oil exporters to renewable powerhouses. African nations are exploring green hydrogen partnerships. Latin America is becoming the center of the world's lithium supply. These alliances, economic today, political tomorrow, may decide who thrives in the 2040s and 2050s, when energy transitions accelerate across the planet. Yet what makes this transformation so fascinating is not the alliances themselves, but the subtle way they are forming. Unlike the Cold War, today's partnerships are not rigid blocks. They are flexible, shifting, constantly evolving. A country might be a military partner of one superpower, a technology partner of another, and an energy partner of a third. Loyalty is no longer the foundation of global politics. Strategy is. As we move forward into the next 50 years, three forces will determine the future of these alliances: access to advanced technology, control over critical resources, and demographic power. Nations that combine these strengths will become central players. Nations that fail to adapt may find themselves sidelined. But one thing is certain: the world order of the future will not be built through wars or revolutions. It will be built through quiet agreements, private negotiations, and strategic interdependence. The alliances shaping the next 50 years are already forming, some in boardrooms, some in parliaments, some in military bases, and some in digital spaces where algorithms decide more than politicians. The question is not whether the old world order is ending. The real question is, who is building the new one, and who will shape the world your children and grandchildren will grow up in? Because the race has already begun, and only those who understand these alliances, seen and unseen, will understand the future that is coming. As we move deeper into the 21st century, the alliances shaping tomorrow are becoming less about borders and more about leverage. Influence is no longer defined by how much land a country controls, but by how much of the world it can shape through resources, technology, information, and economic reach. The most powerful partnerships of the next 50 years will not be those that dominate the headlines today, but those that quietly position themselves at the center of global systems the world cannot live without. One of the most critical transformations ahead lies in the control of supply chains. The pandemic taught every nation a painful lesson. Dependence is a strategic vulnerability. Now, governments are forming alliances not to expand territory, but to secure the essentials of modern life: semiconductors, food, pharmaceuticals, rare earth metals, and energy. The United States is coordinating with Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea to ensure chip security. China is building deep resource partnerships with Africa and Latin America. Europe is forming new trade corridors with India and Central Asia to reduce over-reliance on any single superpower. These are not traditional alliances, but survival networks. And in the decades ahead, survival networks will matter more than military ones. Behind these shifts is an even deeper transformation: the rise of data alliances. In a world where data is more valuable than oil, Nations are quietly negotiating digital access and cybersecurity cooperation. Countries with strong surveillance and digital architecture are exchanging intelligence, securing shared databases, and building cyber defense shields. AI research partnerships are forming between universities, corporations, and governments across continents. Nations are sharing algorithms, quantum computing development, and space-based data systems. The future will belong not just to land-rich or resource-rich nations, but to those who can command the global flow of information. The world is also witnessing the rise of mid-power coalitions, groups of countries that may not be superpowers individually, but collectively possess strategic heft. The Middle East, for example, is undergoing a diplomatic transformation. Long-standing rivalries are softening as new economic goals emerge. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar are building quiet diplomacy channels not only with each other, but with India, China, and Europe. Their sovereign wealth funds, some of the largest on the planet, are being deployed strategically across ports, technology companies, green energy projects, and defense startups. These investments are not just financial, they are geopolitical tools, building influence in regions that will become battlegrounds of global competition. Africa, too, is forging its own alliances. With one of the fastest-growing populations on the planet, abundant natural resources, and a rapidly urbanizing landscape, African nations are negotiating from a place of increasing strength. Partnerships with China brought roads, railways, and industrial zones. Cooperation with the EU focuses on green energy and migration management. Collaborations with India revolve around pharmaceuticals, digital identification systems, and agricultural technology. Over the next 50 years, Africa will no longer be seen as a passive actor. It will be a power broker. Nations that underestimate Africa's alliances today will struggle to influence the global markets of tomorrow. Latin America is beginning its own quiet reorganization. Countries rich in lithium, Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, are discussing an OPEC-style alliance for the minerals that power electric vehicles and batteries. Brazil is expanding its leadership role not just in South America but globally, through environmental diplomacy, agricultural technology, and BRICS initiatives. Mexico is becoming an unexpected winner through nearshoring, aligning with U.S. industries while maintaining its own independent ties abroad. This emerging Latin American bloc may hold more strategic weight in the next half-century than it ever has before. Then there is the Indo-Pacific, the new center of global gravity. This region holds some of the world's most important sea routes, fastest-growing economies, and sharpest geopolitical competition. The alliances forming here will influence everything from trade to security to technological progress. The Quad, India, Japan, Australia, and the United States, continues to evolve beyond a defensive platform into a long-term strategic partnership. ASEAN nations, meanwhile, are weaving together their own economic and defense networks, carefully balancing relations with both China and the West. In the next 50 years, whoever gains influence in the Indo-Pacific will hold the key to global prosperity. But beyond Earth, a new frontier of alliances is emerging: space. The next space race will not be about flags on the moon, but about who controls satellite networks, lunar resources, asteroid mining, space-based solar power, and orbital defense. Nations are pairing up to share rocket technology, launch sites, deep space tracking systems, and lunar missions. The United States leads with its Artemis Accords. China and Russia are collaborating on their own lunar initiatives. The Middle East is entering the space arena with ambitious programs supported by global partners. Europe continues to expand its space autonomy. And India, with growing technological capability, is becoming a preferred partner for countries looking to build cost-effective yet advanced space missions. Space alliances will shape not only communication and navigation, but also energy, defense, and economic systems in ways we are only beginning to imagine. Yet even all these developments pale in comparison to the quietest, most subtle alliance of all: demographic partnerships. Countries with aging populations are building relationships with nations that have younger workforces. Talent mobility agreements, education Japan is training Southeast Asian healthcare workers. Europe is opening skilled migration pathways to preserve its workforce. The Gulf countries are partnering with India and Africa to build future-ready cities and industries. These human-centered alliances will decide which regions thrive in a world where the greatest resource is no longer oil or technology, but people. If the world today feels chaotic, it is because old alliances are weakening at the same time new ones are being born. Trust is shifting. Interests are evolving. And nations are discovering that survival in a complex world requires flexibility, pragmatism, and diversification. The alliances of the next 50 years will not be built on loyalty. They will be built on utility. The real story of the future is not a clash of civilizations, but a competition between networks. Military networks, economic networks, digital networks, migration networks, and energy networks. Nations will join, leave, or alter these networks depending on what gives them the greatest advantage. Power will belong not to those who dominate a region, but to those who sit at the intersection of many such networks. So, what does this mean for the ordinary person watching the world change? It means the decisions made today, in think tanks, royal palaces, presidential offices, corporate boardrooms, military bases, and research labs will shape everything from the food you eat to the technology you use to the stability of the economies your children will inherit. You may not see these alliances. They may never appear as breaking news, but they are determining the architecture of the future. Some nations will rise because they understood these alliances early. Some will fall because they clung to outdated relationships. But the world that emerges in 50 years will be more interconnected, more fragmented, more competitive, and more interdependent than anything humanity has ever experienced. As you look toward the future, understand this. The alliances shaping the next 50 years are not battles for dominance. They are battles for relevance. A new world is forming, quiet and intricate, built on strategies that reach across continents and even beyond our planet. The nations that master this new landscape will not simply survive. They will define the era to come. And that is the story unfolding right now, beneath the surface of the world we think we understand. The true map of global power is being redrawn, not with borders, but with alliances. And the world your grandchildren inherit will be shaped by decisions being made today, often in silence, often behind closed doors, but always with consequences that will echo across generations.